So very good afternoon to everyone. My name is Andrew. I'm from Singapore. I used to work in corporate finance for MNCs, but right now I've kind of jumped into the startup space. I'm a co-founder of AI Copilot, still based in Singapore, and I'm also running the current CFO responsibilities in the startup. Yeah. All right. So in my 20 years of working in corporate finance, I've seen many ways FP&A has been described, both within and outside finance, and it always comes down back to two things, right? One is there's always a need for FP&A to work very closely with colleagues and from other departments and non-finance functions as well. And two, we don't just stop there, right? There's that general expectations that FP&A goes beyond purely doing financial accounting and reporting. In FP&A, we do have a very important role to help translate financial information into common language, common business language, and providing insights for the rest of the organization. I think Vince mentioned something about business intelligence, which is really important on the work that FP&A is expected to do. So on the next slide, question is that how well are we doing in general for FP&A? So it's quite surprising. I took a look at one of the recent Deloitte and EY studies, right? That after so many years of doing FP&A, we are still not doing that very well. And what's more even surprising to see from these studies is that the poor feedback used to come from the business. But from these two studies, right, the 40% and the 29% subpar results you see here are actually coming from within finance now. Finance leaders like you and I giving the feedback. And we've come to a point where, we don't even need other people telling us that we have a lot of room to improve on. And we ourselves want FP&A to do much better, right? So the next slide, one of the areas that in this topic about having a purpose-driven FP&A is that I always feel that we can look into the way we do things in a very traditional finance setup. This chart here kind of shows what I call a very silo-driven, linear, rigid process. It fixes FP&A into a very task-driven mentality. So very often our work is driven as part of a kind of sequential end-to-end workflow between the functional teams, the financial accounting functions, C-level management, right? And generally, this is how systems and processes are set up. It works very well in a stable business environment where nothing changes for 5, 10, 20 years, right? But I think many of us have kind of realized over the last, even the 5 years where we had COVID, right? That's not going to be the case for our businesses. And so for most of us working in very dynamic environments, the end result is a very disconnected approach, right? And it's worse when FP&A is often seen as a choke point to knowledge and information when the business is not doing well. We can't explain what's going on. We can't explain what's happening. We then create frustrations. People take the frustrations on us. Management decides to speak directly to a lot of functional owners without finance involvement. And very often, right, this leads to a lot of non-productive outcomes, a lot of what we call validation and stuff, right? So on the next slide, one of the examples I can give in such a kind of a situation is from a past experiences. I work for two companies where we are mainly services driven. So up to about 70-80% of our costs are driven by staff expenses, right? So in a very silo and linear process, again, in a very stable environment, that's not an issue. But in a very dynamic situation, we often had very deep challenges and difficulties integrating staff costs, payroll reporting, and mashing it with forecasting elements across HR, financial, accounting, and the FP&A teams. So at the same time, when management starts to question in a very volatile business environment, the details and visibility of the numbers, very often the HR and the finance teams can't come together, right, to give management a very coherent and consistent answer. And this is because based on the workflows that's very silo-driven, each of the functions have performed their own operational work within the silos, but they have very actually little visibility or interaction with what the other teams do before and after, right? And this is no fault of theirs, right? It's just a way kind of processes are being set up that results in them lacking visibility of the eventual purpose of their work. Yeah. So the next slide, what I found generally works very well, and this goes back to kind of culture, people, systems, and of course, lastly, having a purpose-driven process. And what I found this goes very well, that ties back to the objective of creating an integrated FP&A, is that we in FP&A ourselves need to adopt a purpose-driven process to addressing business issues, right, in our work. And by this, what I mean is that FP&A needs to stop seeing ourselves as just part of an end-to-end workflow process. Instead, adapt ourselves to be problem solvers. And in the AI world, this is what we call, being a co-pilot in the finance and the business sector, right? So that when a business issue comes up and management has a problem to address, we have to take the lead in identifying the problem, working on the financial data collecting and conducting analysis. And lastly, very importantly, right, coming up with practical advice for management to take on the next best action in the process. So in doing so, we need to help take that leadership role, like I said, either horizontally or bottoms up. We don't even have to wait for a top-down approach to cut across the silos and the linear processes and learn how to coordinate data analysis. And very importantly, engage subject matter experts in a very interactive manner. So this way, FP&A stops becoming a task-driven operator, but instead become results-focused, right? So an example I gave about headcount reporting and visibility. So instead of actually kind of sitting around and just saying that, well, the reports come from financial accounting, we don't know what HR is doing, well, they gave the numbers, right? And we sit around waiting just to put Excel sheets together. We take our chance to go in and we start asking our questions about what is the management trying to address, right? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And therefore, we can actually go to the right parties to get the information without having to kind of segue back into a linear process again, right? So on my last slide, next, I just want to highlight three areas that I've kind of learned along the way in my career that's quite important for success at FP&A in this very driven process. Some of it is quite elementary as well, right? But it's quite important. So one, in an integrated company, it is quite important that we understand that data, right, is no longer residing in silo subsystems or with different departments. It's actually belonging to a wider master data that belongs to the company in general. So we need to make sure that this is set up consistently. So for example, right, in the headcount example or reports that we see again, it's quite elementary, but we find that even a simple definition about what constitutes an FTE count may actually differ across HR and finance. And if this is not standardized, you end up with a disaster about, floating up a common or a single source of truth back to management, right? Two, systems in the organization must be set up to support collaboration and integration. And this is actually going to get both easier and harder as well with the influx of new tech and AI tools and maybe even new CPM tools that replaces FP&A into finance. And this is where the IS information systems expertise is so important in helping to link up the end-to-end systems architecture in the company, right? So we actually need to build our own knowledge about how systems are being built. Data is kind of shared across the organization, and partner IS and the functional owners in making sure that the whole subsystems and the architecture is set up properly. And lastly, we did talk about culture earlier, so it's quite important. We do not underestimate the need to engage our finance and non-finance colleagues at a personal level, so that in the process of checking out a problem, working out solutions, right, it's actually quite important to invest time with stakeholders and subject matter experts. I find that actually the options or the kind of solutions, right, is in talking to people opens up a whole new world of kind of possibilities in looking at the problem from different angles. And of course, for us to kind of tie in what that means in terms of the financial language as well, right? So this, I think this is all the sharing I have. And Olga, I think I'll hand it back to you for the next one.